So let's talk about the pandemic treaty, or the WHO power grab. So we'll just have a quick summary before we start here. So WHO, World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty, TLDR review. There's going to be more surveillance, more power to the WHO, more funding to the WHO, and more restrictions on information. To counteract that, there's going to be less privacy, less free speech, less personal freedom, and less national sovereignty.
Swings and roundabouts.
Yep. So he then finishes with an appeal. Do one thing for me. Consider the loss of civil liberties around the globe in the last couple of years. If you don't like the way that went, you really won't like where this is heading now. Time to speak up, spread the word. And if we go to this petition, there is actually a petition out there. It's growing in signatures. It had about 100,000 last I checked, had about 117,000 before I went on. And now it's at 119,000. It would be really good if that could tick up a bit higher by the end of the podcast, I think. But yes, so this petition is asking the government to not sign any WHO pandemic treaty unless it is approved via a referendum, which I think is a reasonable request, don't you?
Yeah, it's also already got 100,000, so it will have a debate in Parliament and a government response.
Mm-hmm.
And we're used to how these things work. We're not deluded about how the government will react, usually. But it's always good to get something out of them, because then you can see how their mind works and get another admission at least.
Yes, and if there are a lot of signatures to that, then politicians do sort of wake up to that and start to think, maybe this is something I should factor into my calculus.
Sometimes.
Slippery double dealing and triple dealing. And on this subject, I will just point out we have an article on our website from the middle of the pandemic called "It's Not the Government's Job to Keep You Safe." This is by Luna, one of our external writers, with recent voiceover done by John Crow. And no, it's not the government's job to keep you safe. It's worth meditating on that, I think. But let's move back to the pandemic treaty. Let's get into the details. So, in a few days, officials from your country are meeting to discuss a pandemic treaty. A draft proposal sits before the WHO in Geneva. 56 pages of acronyms, obscure references, and nonsense. I spent 12 hours translating it into English so you can understand it in 12 minutes. The official title gives you an idea about the tone of the whole report. You can see why most commentators have adopted the term pandemic treaty. For the rest of the thread, I'll call it the Zero Draft, and the title there, Zero Draft Report of the Working Group on Strengthening WHO Preparedness and Response to Health Emergencies to the 75th World Health Assembly. Just by reading that title, you know that it's going to be a bit of a snooze fest to wade through in the original language.
Purposely done.
Probably, yeah. So what's the deal, and why are people worried about this thing? Why do you think people are worried about this thing?
Who trust them? I mean, I love doing segments about anything to do with the UN or World Health Organization and whatnot, because you can literally sit there and be like Alex Jones and say, yeah, so the damn globalists. Because it's 100% true. Like, I do not trust globalists to make any decision on anything, because they don't take into the effect of, like, the constituent nations.
Yes.
They're not relevant.
Well, that's the thing. They are best served in a mediation capacity, right? So one example of a successful global organization is the World Trade Organization. And that acts in a mediatory role to ensure that trade disputes between nations are restricted, more or less, and don't spiral up into warfare or anything like that. And I think that's a reasonable use. But the problem is, once they start evolving to themselves powers to which they are not accountable to anyone, that's where it gets kind of scary. Because they're not accountable to the people democratically via the ballot box. At best, they're accountable to the governments, but then that's kind of tenuous. And then, of course, they're accountable to their own private donors. And it's worth pointing out here that the second biggest donor to the World Health Organization is apparently the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Interesting, that, isn't it? Well, let's continue. So, it's a proposal right now, but it's a scary proposal. If enacted, the WHO will have far greater authority in relation to your health, particularly if there is a pandemic, and they will inevitably declare one. This thread is not based on hype, speculation, or conspiracy theory. This is my assessment of the original Zero Draft published by the WHO and sourced from their website. The document contains 131 recommended proposals that fit broadly into 10 categories. High level. The plan is to increase power and funding for the WHO. It would solidify the WHO as, quote, the directing and coordinating authority on international health. You can make your own assessment of the WHO's track record and whether you trust them to have that role.
Yeah, no.
Just as a little icebreaker, I did a quick search and counted how many times certain words appeared in the Zero Draft. The V word, 33 times. Surveillance, 30 times. misinformation 7 times, and privacy just 5 times. Interesting. That should give you the general vibe of the thing. Let's return to those 10 categories now. We'll work through them in order. The proposal assigns responsibility for each action to one or more of 3 parties: member states, countries, the World Health Organization, and non-state actors, other stakeholders. Bill Gates.
I mean, literally, though. Like, this is not anything that's conspiratorial. No, the guy gives the money, and they take the money. Okay, then they're compromised by the money.
Yeah.
Simplest politics.
Now, political leadership, more funding for the WHO, regular simulation exercises, and non-state actors to help fight disinformation and use their considerable data to help the WHO. I'm presuming this is going to be, say, Microsoft, Twitter, Facebook, and Apple, so on and so forth. Great. You know, those companies that make devices that everyone carries around with them all the time. Cooperation and collaboration. More research to inform and expand public health and social measures during pandemics. More support for the WHO Research and Development Blueprint. Read Accelerated Vaccine and, damn it, I said it, and Diagnostic Development. WHO at the centre. WHO to act as the directing coordinating authority on international health, to depoliticize recruitment, especially at senior levels, and focus on merit and competency. That sounds great, and he comments, they should be doing that already, no? Well, it's worth pointing out that Tedros is, I think, the first director in the history of the organisation to not be a doctor.
I mean, isn't he also a communist, probably a genocide?
From Ethiopia.
Enjoyer?
I don't know about the genocide claim, but there was an allegation that he was involved in covering up a cholera outbreak. And there has also been an allegation that he was involved in covering up another outbreak of greater significance, but there we go.
I swear he's been accused of either engaging in genocide or aiding genocide. Let me load it up.
It's on the Tigray.
Yeah. Aiding genocide in Ethiopia.
Just who you want looking after your health. Anyway. So actually more meritocratic recruitment and promotion would be great, but
less genocide than our employees.
Yeah. Financing. Member states to give the WHO more money. I saw that one coming. More investment to support the development of innovative V-words and therapeutics. More transparency in relation to funding. It's good, but it's pretty transparent. But it's also alarming if we see this. Like, this is the top contributors to the WHO. We have Germany, then the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, then the USA.
Like, China's dropped their funding. They used to be way higher, didn't they?
Yes, they did. I can't even see them on there.
They're in the middle there, just above Norway. But this
Right.
is for 2020 to 2021, so that's changed, which is interesting.
Yes, it has been quite fluctuating. But China has other ways of influencing the organisation rather than just giving them money.
So I think it was like last year, Trump just pulled the funding. It was just like, nope, not doing it.
Yeah, a few years ago. But USA immediately jumped back on when Biden got into power. Sustainability of C19 innovative mechanisms. Temporary initiatives developed as a response to C19 made permanent and expanding their focus. Examples include the ACT accelerator broadening to other diseases like Disease X.
Sorry, what does that mean?
I have absolutely no idea, but I'm just going through it all so that you can work out how.
Is that the
this
next
makes
pandemic?
sense.
We're just going to call it Disease X until it happens.
Might be.
Okay.
Global surveillance, implementation of a One Health approach to reduce risks posed by emerging diseases of zoonotic origin. A zoonotic disease is an infectious disease, he says, transmitted between species from animals to humans or vice versa. And he's
But again,
got a
this
nice little Latin
globalist
emoji.
mindset, One Health approach. Because, there's never unique circumstances in a unique place. And therefore, it'd probably be better for that country to figure out how to deal with it.
No, we need a mighty, enormous galaxy brain sitting in the middle of Geneva to plan how healthcare should be run in the South Sudan.
His stock solution that works everywhere at all times in all places.
And if it doesn't work for you, well, you're not in Geneva, so you can't hold him accountable. Strengthening the international health regulations, more capacity for genomic testing, development of plans for emergency preparedness, surveillance and response, development of national focus points with sufficient authority in each country, and WHO to guide NFPs on best practices and conduct regular targeted training, development of travel and trade regulations, great, more regulations, more sharing of public health data and information with the WHO, increased capacity for proactive countermeasures against misinformation, and
I don't even know what we're allowed to say about
stronger
that.
approaches to information and infodemic management. And he has his own opinion on
What
that.
does that mean?
Well, there is an argument that, for example, do you remember the whole 5G conspiracy? Like that nut that nutty idea that 5G towers cause a certain disease. That's what they call an infodemic. It's misinformation that's harmful when applied, that spreads throughout social media networks and then leads to people, say, burning down 5G towers.
I don't trust them with that.
No.
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 I'm also very skeptical of how the 5G theory came about. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a psyop in
No,
origin.
I wouldn't be surprised if it actually comes from like the John Hopkins guys or whatever, like someone releasing it as an actual paper and then it got taken into where it was.
No, I doubt
I mean,
that.
it's the same with like what is it, the autism thing? Like that was, it's all nonsense, but
Yeah.
originally it did actually come from some journal, and then
Yes, Andrew Wake.
I can't
forget.
remember the details,
But yeah, no, that was a genuine hoax. But I think there are many other sources of bad misinformation than just the scientific literature, and especially here, I think national intelligence agencies are probably more culpable. But there we go. They continue. Universal Health and Preparedness Review pilot, collaborating with various countries to identify best practices, whatever that means. Travel measures. Development of a digital certificate of vaccination. Now, there is... I hate to be the devil's advocate all the time, but there is an argument why this would be useful. Because at the moment, vaccine monitoring, forget COVID, but for other things...
yellow fever, should we take?
Yeah, is quite clunky, right? You have to, before you're traveling to a country that doesn't have various reciprocal agreements, you go to your doctor, you get a piece of paper filled out and signed verifying that you have all of these, you've had all of these vaccinations that you need for your travel. There is an argument that you could just get that done once, it's digitally stored, you don't have to worry about it at all when you're traveling, you just show it and you move on. That could, in that case, be an example of that assisting travel. But of course, the question is always, what if you don't have the vaccine? What if you even have legitimate health reasons as to why you don't have the vaccine, right? There's not going to be a button on the app saying, I don't have this, for so on and so forth, unless this digital certificate, like the way that it's implemented, also figures in medically justified exemptions. I can see this being very tyrannical because it basically gets to say to you, oh, you didn't have this vaccine, you can't leave the country now. No one said you couldn't. Like, there's no law necessarily in place saying you can't leave the country, but the system has just been designed to exclude you. That is really dystopian.
I mean, we're already having some of the vaccine requirements to go to certain countries dropped. If we had this global implementation system, I don't think any of them would have been dropped.
No.
I think you'd just be screwed. And it's a much worse world, so I don't want it.
No, absolutely not. And development of digital contact tracing in the international context. Now, again, there's a world in which this could be a good thing, but if we see how digital contact tracing has panned out in the developed world, it's been my understanding is it's been a complete fiasco from start to finish. What do you think?
I don't know, I just hear in the UK it just never worked.
No,
So-
we had the, what was it, the pingdemic,
Yeah.
which was where so many people getting pinged saying, oh, you may have been in contact, so that businesses were unable to function, trains cancelled and so on and so forth, because people were getting pinged.
With false flags.
Yes. So it's not just about now. I'm not saying digital contact tracing is per se bad. There is a world in which it can work, but we need to be careful and sensible in our approach to it, and not hysterical. And quite frankly, if there's anything guiding our response to pandemics, it's hysteria. So there we go. Equity, increased vaccine development, manufacturing capacity, and regulation. That sounds pretty good. I hate the way they use equity.
I don't know where they're going with this.
Initiatives to ensure people with limited means receive vaccines and other countermeasures. That's also good, generally speaking. But they have a whole definition here. Let's have a read of this. Its definition of equity based on its constitution. Equity is a principle that can be defined as the attainment by all peoples of the highest possible level of health. Well, that's not possible, because if you have a chronic health condition, then you, by definition, cannot have the highest possible level of health. So anyway, this was further elaborated as follows. Health is the state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being. Yeah, that's also an unattainable ideal. Well done. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. Yes, okay, fair enough.
Impossible.
Highest attainable, though, they qualify that by. Yes, but...
Hang on, there are
it's
certain
a
religions
right.
that don't accept certain surgeries, for example, so that's also wrong, but by the by.
Yeah, no, there's that as well. But claiming health as a right, of course, is another controversial standpoint, because it requires the mobilization of a huge amount of resources in order to give you access to that right to medical treatment and care and so on and so forth. And anyway, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds there. The health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. You will cooperate. It's quite ominous the way that's written, isn't it? The achievement of any state in the promotion and protection of health is of value to all. Unequal development in different countries and the promotion of health and control of disease is a common danger, especially with communicable diseases. And yeah, I mean, the fact is, highly developed and not so developed countries will have asymmetric outcomes when it comes to pandemics. Sorry, I hate to, be the bearer of breaking news here, but I mean,
all I'm getting from this is just, would you sign this if it was given to you for your life?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
So just why the hell are we signing this as a country?
Mm-hmm.
Just like you must give your full cooperation to the WHO.
Yeah.
Go to hell.
I don't see what we get out of this.
F off globalists.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to lean hard into this equity orientation, then what that means is taking the resources of developed countries and redistributing them to less developed countries. And in some cases, that's a worthy thing. But I think we should have the agency as a nation to do that on our own initiative and not be forced into it by some unaccountable global organization. He finishes, I'm a fan of Don't Trust, Verify. In that spirit, here's the link to the Zero Draft in full on the WHO website. It's hard to read, don't say I didn't warn you, and that will be there. And also, if you follow the links in the podcast, you'll be able to follow through this thread to find it. A few outlets are talking about this, though. It's not been a complete media blackout. We've got a short clip from Dewey News here.
This thing hasn't really been covered by most mainstream news outlets, and you would think it would be a pretty big deal. I think it's 194 countries now, which is basically everyone, who've signed on to this new pandemic treaty with the WHO.
Right. You'd think that the first step to world governance would be something that people would be interested in. But as per usual, the whole thing surrounding this is that this is not a democratic process. This is something that is diametrically opposed to the democratic process. And that's why we're not hearing about it. Because what they're doing now, they're working on a treaty of which we will see the first draft on August 1st of this year, which is called the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty, which, as you said rightfully, will be a legally binding treaty for practically every single nation on the earth. So once a new pandemic hits, and those are their words, not mine, we will have a united response to how to deal with the pandemic, meaning that there will be this organization that is not democratically elected, that we didn't vote for. We don't even know exactly who is in it or who we can hold accountable for the things that they will impose on us, is going to basically create laws that will decide how our respective nations are going to respond to a new crisis, a new pandemic. So this is huge news and it's very dangerous, but as just indeed, we're not hearing anything about it.
Yeah. And again, the silence of the mainstream media is just depressing.
I was loving the chat there, just being like, yeah, Mark Stein just looks like a base Charlie Brooker. I never thought of that, but that is definitely true as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So Eva Vladingerbrook has a little more to say on her Substack here. Our rights and national sovereignty are about to be handed over to the WHO in an unprecedented way. The MSM is silent as the grave. And she continues, and I will just close out. So it's worth pointing out these amendments to these regulations in conjunction with the new WHO pandemic treaty. She's talking about some internal regulations being changed in America here. Give the WHO virtually full control over our society's response in the case of a new pandemic. And that's not what we want for multiple reasons. One being that this is the start of a post-democratic society and a world government, in her opinion. And it's
that's what I share. I mean,
right.
Globalist shills, yeah, of course they're not democratic.
And let's also not forget who will be ruling. The second largest financial donor to the WHO is, of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the man who wants the whole world to be vaccinated with vaccines that he coincidentally has major stakes in. I mean, Bill Gates at this point has major stakes in everything, but it's true. Like, surely there's a conflict of interest here in the sense that he has large investments in pharmaceuticals, and also he is the biggest donor, the biggest private donor to the WHO. Is this not slightly concerning, guys? Anyway, and I will just point out, so with these international health regulations that are being amended by the Biden administration, the general trends are twofold. The first is, in the case that provisions are added, they always give the WHO and the Director General substantial additional powers, and where provisions were scrapped, they were always regarded as safeguards to state parties' rights to take their own decisions. In short, national sovereignty everywhere around the world is under attack by these amendments put forward by the USA.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the deep things we do, this one from Connor Tomlinson on Englishman for exclusivity against equality, and also an audio track for silver and gold tiers. But if you'd like to follow what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.